Welcome back to Parents Perspective, brought to you by Speak, our youth coalition here in St. Clair County. I'm Amy Bishop, and with me is Mike Thomas today to talk about unpredictability. So we're in the midst of COVID, and our kids are going from virtual to in person and then back again. In fact, Mike, we were initially going to talk about, hey, it's been a little bit stressful to get everything going, organized again, to get back into school in person. And before we could tape the show, boom, we were back to virtual. So I don't know about you, but it's been a little tough for my family.
It has been for mine as well too. And if you guys can tell by the location, I've had a little bit of my own unpredictability with COVID quarantine. I'm doing it in my own basement, which is also a new basement because I just bought a new house. So a lot of different changes all at the same time. So with that said, things come and go. And yeah, you're right, Amy. If there's been one consistency in this past year, it's been inconsistency. And so with that said, we've had to really come up with a lot of different ways of doing things that we might not normally have done and get creative. So I kind of like the fact that we're talking about this today because we want to help everybody understand, like, what are some creative solutions, things that you can do during these times, because one day to the next, things could change. And so, Amy, you've had a great list of a couple different things that you want to share. So what do you think would be that number one big thing that we can do right off the bat to really help get folks settled, knowing that one day the next things could change?
Well, I have a whole list, honestly, but the overarching goal here to deal with unpredictability and with unpredictability brings a great deal of stress. And I think that in the future, we're going to look back and realize that it almost caused, and people will have different intensity of, but it's caused trauma in a lot of ways. So I've looked at those components of how we would go about approaching someone who has been through trauma. And I've kind of categorized those. But the overarching goal here is creating a safe place. And that can mean a lot of different things, but we want to try to give kids control of what they can control so that they feel like they're in control of something. We want to build trust, and I'm going to talk about maybe how we can do that. And part of that is predictability, in ourselves, and getting organized so that we follow a routine and we can at least we can count on some things to be consistent and predictable. And then how to support our kids and model what we're trying to teach them. I know as far as myself, I realized my son, he would kind of get upset with me if I would say, hey, tomorrow we're going here. Let's say, for example, and he would get upset with me and say, why didn't you tell me? And I said, well, I am telling you. But I did not realize that he had maybe his own plans in mind. And because of these uncertain times, that maybe he is more sensitive to, sudden changes. So even though I gave him, like a night's notice, that wasn't enough notice. So, maybe lengthening, planning out, talking about what we're going to do throughout the week and really sticking to a schedule daily and weekly, that would help. So what do you think, Mike?
I think the communication, like you're saying, is a big part of that as well. For a lot of us, it's pretty much one day to the next what's going on. If we can have, in general, some type of plan in place on a daily basis, what to communicate, what to expect. Starting off in the morning can be a great thing. I think a lot of times it's easy to just know, like if the youth don't have to go to school till 9 o'clock, they can stay up a little bit later, maybe go to bed a little bit later. I kind of like the idea of actually maintaining some consistency with all that. So that way, they're going to bed and getting up at the same time, regardless of whether or not they're in school or at home. If we do that and we set up a time in the morning to initially communicate that, keep that routine, there's some consistency right there that we can count on, regardless of whether or not they got to get on the bus or they got to get on the computer first thing in the morning. And so trying to establish that communication is going to be a big piece for that. And with that, like you're saying, Amy, what were we planning on doing today? What were we planning on doing this evening? Regardless of what happens, what's going on, or communicate the day before. If we know as parents that they're going to have to go back to school, then we share that a couple days ahead so they've got the notice. And if something happens at night, we communicate maybe in the evening, just say, hey, just so you guys are aware, the school's communicated. We're going to go back to Zoom for now. So here's what we can do. But I try to keep that same timeline. We're getting up and going to bed. regular, because that'll help with sleep. That'll help with a lot of things. And if we're rested well, that can help with a lot of the other issues.
Great, great points. Absolutely. Routine and schedule is very important in unpredictable, chaotic times for sure. And the other thing that goes with that is get organized. Whatever tools you can purchase to do that, it is worth the investment. So whether that's calendars or whiteboards to have conversations back and forth, or put reminders on, especially, some of us are experiencing maybe overtime, making up for the times that we weren't working. Our work still builds up. We've got essential workers. So our students are maybe kind of on their own. So I think creating an organized space that makes sense to them and involving them, and maybe purchasing some bins or other organizational things that they can kind of get their day together.
Making a good point, Amy, with that. As far as the spacing things out, just having everything organized as well, creating actually in that situation, maybe designated spots where if you have multiple children, where they're going to go. It might be their bedroom. It might be the kitchen table. One issue I'm running into right now is that actually the same room that I will use with my computer is the same one my son usually uses. And now that I have to be here, what do we do now? So we go, so he's got another spot that he uses. So having those bins, having things organized, and then coming up with a fallback plan just in case something happens. And if we, and a friend of mine talked with me about this before, he calls it mental reps. If we go into a situation kind of planning ahead what could be some possibilities, and we practice that enough, we can model that for our children. And so when these patterns of unpredictability come in, they already have the mindset ready of what I can do just in case. And so for me, it's like, if I know something's going to be a little bit anxious, what can I do to keep myself calm so they're not, because my children are going to be a lot more anxious than I am. And if I can keep my calm and I can have some predictability in how I respond to things, they can feed off that. Really, all of it's just, it can be reasonable. We're sharing the information for the right reasons. And so just be ready for it and be ready in your mind to set that up. Sorry, Amy, you froze there for a second, so I jumped in. My apologies.
No, I appreciate you doing that. No, you had some really great points. And I really want to have this, I want to continue this conversation, because I think this is really important and would, many families are feeling off kilter, and organization and communication and dealing with some different tactics on how parents can support their kids in many ways. So let's continue this conversation next time on Parents Perspective. And remember that Speak is brought to you by Region 10 and community agencies and businesses that support us around the county. So until next time, we'll see you later.